I want you to do something. I want you to use your imagination. Picture this. It's January 2004, George W. Bush is president, flip phones is still a thing, LeBron James is a rookie, and Tom Brady is working on winning his second Super Bowl with the New England Patriots. And you just got your hands on the newest NFL game from EA that's not Madden NFL. It's called NFL Street. You turn on your PS2, and you are introduced to a new arcade football experience like never before. When NFL Street dropped, I was actually in the 3rd grade, so I was roughly around 8 years old, but vividly remember playing this game all the time by myself and with my friends, and still till this day, the NFL Street series continues to hold a special significance with sports gamers. If you were lucky enough to experience this series in real time, these games live rent-free in your head, and there are hundreds of videos on YouTube of people taking the walk down memory lane, enjoying the greatness of what NFL Street was. But as great as NFL Street was, why did EA stop developing it in the first place? Not only did EA scrap the NFL series, they stopped developing all of their alternative sports titles and shut down the EA Sports big division. Thus, all arcade sports games from EA suddenly disappeared on some Avatar The Last Airbender-ish. But you know that's why we're here, my people. We are here to get to the bottom of what happened to EA Sports Big and what happened to NFL Street, and why both of these things failed the way they did and have disappeared for decades on end, and why EA ultimately doesn't have an arcade style extreme sports division anymore. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into this. You guys know what to do. Hit that like button, slap that subscribe button. Welcome to the channel if you're new. Hope you stick around. It's a good time, I promise. Now, let's go ahead and get into this.
Oh my God, baby. Oh my gosh, baby, the way she makes me.
EA, since its inception in 1982, was focused on one thing and one thing only: being a leader in at-home gaming. But specifically speaking of sports though, the demographic they were focused on was catering to the hardcore sports gamer that is looking for the most realistic and competitive experience, which made EA very unique. While other companies were focused on fantasy mostly, they had a vision of realism that early home computers and consoles couldn't support yet. So safe to say, EA for a majority of their first couple of decades from the 80s through the 90s wasn't too concerned with the fantasy experience. But we do need to keep in perspective that the most popular form of games in these early years of the industry was arcade games. So the fantasy gaming experience was already heavily saturated with all kinds of developers getting in on the new booming market of video games. But as time would show, the market started to evolve and shifted into EA's favor. While the popularization of video games began in the arcades, the 90s was the boom for console gaming. Arcades were beginning to be on its downward trend as console technology started to make impressive leaps. With cartridges becoming outdated and CD-ROMs being the new standard, it wasn't long till full 3D graphics were a norm for console gaming. Sports simulation became more appealing to the consumers, and that meant even more emphasis for EA to put on being the leader in sports simulation. And just as fun fact, even though EA has been around since the 80s, the EA Sports division wasn't officially founded and branded until 1991. So now that we have formed and framed that EA only cared about pushing sports simulation forward, the question is, how does a company that only mission was about sports simulation shift into expanding an interest into arcade games? Well, it was one man that is mostly, or if not solely, the reason for this shift happening. That would be Steven Rechtschaffner. Wow, that was a lot harder than I expected it to be. Now, I know a lot of you don't even know who this guy is, but he is the founder and creator of the entire EA Sports Big division. Without him, there would be no NFL Street, NBA Street, and obviously anything else that was developed under the EA Sports Big label. But how did he get EA to give him a shot at creating an entirely new division that is not even a part of their mission? Well, Steven was already a game developer within EA Sports. He was part of the team that created the very first FIFA game, which was a success, and due to the culture of EA at the time, they had a policy called the Silver Bullet Initiative, which gave the developers who were part of a team of a successful game release the chance to take a lead on a new development of a game opportunity. So our boy Steven here spearheaded the development of EA Triple Play 97 baseball game, and safe to say that was another successfully released game, which made Steven 2 for 2, which gave him 2 bullets. And that is what led to him getting the opportunity to create a whole new game from the ground up. With this opportunity, he was inspired to make a snowboarding game first, out of the love he had for winter sports and extreme sports, which eventually became the very first SSX snowboarding game and the birth of EA's arcade video games. But unfortunately though, there was some business gymnastics that took place before the SSX game could make its debut. See, EA was intrigued by the idea of making a snowboarding game. There was no time wasted to get development going, but there was an issue on what console platform this new title was going to launch on. Initially, the Sega Saturn was in mind, but EA decided to wait till next-gen consoles release because the Saturn's hardware wasn't strong enough for their liking. Then the Sega Dreamcast was about to launch and EA was ready to go to give the green light. But Sega had an issue with EA's game licensing demands for their sports titles mainly. An agreement couldn't be reached, so EA dumped Sega and went to Sony and PlayStation. And just for context, this was also the birth of Sega and EA's beef with each other in the sports genre. Sega launched their in-house sports titles NFL 2K and NBA 2K alongside the Sega Dreamcast launch, and then they became mortal enemies ever since, and we covered all of that in our last few video essays. If you haven't watched those, go watch those. But back to Steven and SSX, right? So the Sony executives, after seeing the demo of SSX, were all in and gave their full support. Steven's dev team was flown out to Japan to finish development, and SSX was a part of the launch catalog of games for the PlayStation 2. SSX was an absolute banger with the gamers and also the critics. This game got universal acclaim with 9 out of 10 scores from game critics, running away with awards like it was nothing. It's a lot of hardware, okay, so I'm gonna go down the list a little bit. SSX got PlayStation 2 Game of the Year at the 2000 Gamers Choice and Reader Awards, won GameSpot's Best PlayStation 2 Game Award and Best Sound, Best Console Game of the Year, Best Console Racing Game of the Year, Best Console Sports Game of the Year, Best Gameplay Engineering, and Best Visual Engineering at the Interactive Achievement Awards. The list goes on, and I'm pretty sure you guys get the idea, right? The game was so fire, it has too many awards for me to want to name individually here, but this was nothing short of a storybook beginning for Steven and the new EA Sports Big label. And indeed, this was only the beginning for EA Sports Big domination over the arcade market. After the mega success of SSX debut, EA's favorite language was in full effect: money talk. With the expansion of their brand into arcade-style games, came more sequels for SSX, as it obviously was going to be the flagship IP for the EA Big brand. But EA knew the possibilities were endless tapping into the arcade market. They wanted to experiment. They wanted to see if they can replicate the formula from SSX and apply it to other sports. So the following year, in the summer of 2001, EA launched its second game under EA Sports Big with the very first NBA Street game in June, while SSX Tricky, the follow-up to the OG SSX, was released in November of that year. NBA Street was a situation of great timing, capitalizing on Midway's flop release of NBA Hoops in February, which was out 4 months prior to NBA Street making its debut. After NBA Hoops' negative reception from critics, NBA Street was welcomed breath of fresh air in the arcade basketball market, receiving a universal 8.5 out of 10 score from critics. It sold 1.7 million copies in the US, and it wasn't as awarded as the founder game of SSX, but it was a massive success with the fans, so EA was more than motivated to keep investing into more development for arcade sports games. EA Sports Big kept the momentum going with their motocross game Freakstyle in 2002. It was received favorably, but 2003 was arguably one of the greatest years for EA Big. They released not only SSX3, which is regarded as the most successful out of the series, with the addition for the very first time we've seen an open world snowboarding game. They also released NBA Street Volume 2. Now, I'm not trying to gloss over NBA Street Volume 2, but I mean, it's not the topic of discussion for this video. But NBA Street Volume 2, though, is one of the best, if not the best, in the series out of the NBA Street series. And on top of that, they had Michael Jordan return to video games in 3 different versions, which we did cover in our Michael Jordan video essay. If you guys have not watched that, watch that too. But NBA Street Volume 2 was one of the most highest selling games on PlayStation 2. And on top of that, it was also named one of PlayStation 2's greatest hits. So NBA Street Volume 2 is already what it is. It doesn't need to be explained. But let's keep moving forward. Now, after 2003, NFL Street was slated to come out at the top of the year in January of 2004. But Steven had nothing to do with the production and development of NFL Street. It was actually developed by the EA Tuberon team that develops Madden NFL. So it had the EA Sports Big label on it, but none of Steven's magic and vision that make a game truly EA Sports Big. SSX3 and NBA Street Volume 2 was actually Steven's last projects he produced as a lead on. He actually was moved to another position, got a promotion within the company that forced him to have less involvement in overseeing the production of EA's big titles, and this, according to Steven, was the beginning of the end for EA Sports Big, actually. And I'm going to refer to this article that I found right here where Steven was interviewed, and he was quoted saying that for me was the end of it. He says, "I think it started to dissipate over time, and rather than the brand getting more focused, it got a little less focused, and I think eventually it just kind of disappeared." Now, NFL Street still went on to be a successful launch, riding off the hype from SSX3 and NBA Street Volume 2 releases last year. NFL Street landed pretty solid, with critics getting an overall 8.5 out of 10 score and sold modestly with gamers. Being a polar opposite of the simulation style that EA has built its name on, NFL Street for the first time was EA displaying the NFL brand in a less serious light, which can be great and welcomed, but yet polarizing at the same time for longtime EA football fans. Given by the sales numbers, you can tell NFL Street was a risky chance for EA, alienating its sim fan base to tap into the casual football gamer market. With the cartoonish looking player models, between the legs touchdown bomb passes, players getting tackled so hard their bodies flying around from massive hits, NFL Street was a major shift from the usual. By the summer of 2006, the sales totaled to 950,000 copies, and it earned a total of $37 million. Compared to NFL Madden 2004, that sold over 2 million copies in its first 3 weeks. By the end of the summer of 2006, the PS2 version sold 3.5 million copies and earned $170 million in the US alone. Now, these numbers are very indicative of how to gauge fan interest. But Madden has been around for about 20 years at this point, so it would outsell NFL Street, which is a whole new IP. So you guys can gauge success in a different way you would if Madden only made $37 million like NFL Street did, right? But NFL Street, it did well enough to get a sequel. Now the knock critics had on NFL Street is that it lacked depth in the gameplay. It didn't offer very much with the game modes. It was very bare bones. But again, we have to keep in mind that our boy Steven has nothing to do with the NFL Street series. So NFL Street got a sequel, and a lot of people's favorite out of the series, and especially my favorite, NFL Street 2, this game was released, I kid you not, by the end of 2004 in December. Yes, you heard me right. NFL Street, the original, was released in January in 2004, and the sequel came out 11 months later. So safe to say, NFL Street 2 did not get much of a development cycle. Why this game came out so fast, I don't know. But as a fourth grader, you think I cared? No, I didn't. I was just happy to get another NFL Street. Now, NFL Street 2 was everything you liked about the first one, but there was more added to the game modes. The main game mode was Own the City mode. You could create a player and build up your own team to play the rapper Exhibit and his all-star team in the final game to own the city. Now, why was Exhibit in a football game? I don't know. But did you think I cared? No, I didn't, because this mode was fire to fourth grade me and still is to adult me. So I didn't think nothing of it. And on top of that, the gameplay additives, as you can do wall running, wall jukes, wall throws, wall catches, and just everything with the wall was just incorporated in NFL Street 2. And that's the thing. As an NFL Street fan, you don't care. Okay, you just like the entertainment value that you're getting from this game, right? And that is the mentality of NFL Street fans. We enjoyed the game for what it was. But the critics, though, they didn't enjoy the game so much. Overall, NFL Street 2 was received average at best with critics, getting around a 7.5 out of 10 score. The Times magazine gave the game 3 out of 5 stars, making statements like, though the game does enough to entertain for an hour or two, fans of proper football played with feet are likely to find it quite dull. The Sydney Morning Herald gave the game 2.5 stars out of 5 and stated that while Street 2 is appealing, approachable, it gets monotonous, particularly for owners of the original. Solo modes are dull and arduous. Despite somewhat negative reviews, though, NFL Street 2 did manage to receive a nomination for Console Action Sports Game of the Year by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences. And again, the critics didn't love the games, but we the fans enjoyed them, which led to another NFL Street game being developed with NFL Street 3 with Chad Johnson Ocho Cinco on the cover. Now, this game came out in 2006, so there was actually some kind of real development time put into this release, but NFL Street 3 was not received the best by fans or critics. Overall, it got an average score of about a 7 out of 10 for critics, and as gamers goes, the NFL Street 3 went silently with the fans. It was a very mixed reception on both ends. If you look at something like YouTube, there is no shortage of NFL Street 1 and 2 videos, but NFL Street 3 is left out of the celebration of nostalgia. It's the forgotten third entry in the series, and if I'm going to be honest, I always forget that there's a third NFL Street myself, and that is for a number of reasons, but we can refer back to what Steven said in the article. He initially said that the brand had lost its focus, so things were a little more loose into what was the direction for each EA big title. But he also further was asked in the interview, what did he think caused EA Sports' big downfall and his eventual exit from the company altogether? And he was quoted saying, certainly EA taking a conservative approach played a part. John Riccitiello's promotion to the position of the CEO of EA in 2007, along with the advent of financial crisis a year later, which is 2008, recession, brought huge changes to the way the company operated. EA laid off 11% of its workforce, shut down 12 of its facilities, and moved towards a risk adverse business model. Gone were the days of taking risk of experimental projects and trusting the producer's instincts. Steven was quoted also saying the approval process that had developed, the silver bullet thing, no longer existed. Instead, we had an approval process that involved a lot of salespeople, marketing people, and not so many game makers. I think it shifted to become much more marketing focused, much more new feature focused for a number of years. And I think that her big franchises like FIFA, where the gameplay kind of got stagnant, and even though there were all those marketable features, it left them vulnerable to competition. So just getting off script here for a second, I'm thinking a little too much, but with all that being said, so based off of a lot of other factors, but as far as EA is concerned, after 2003, everything that was EA big had nothing to do with Steven. And if that was the result of lackluster sequels that came out after that, that really was because Steven was detached and he wasn't even involved with the company. And then around 2007, he was gone out of the company altogether. So EA Big was running without the mastermind behind what made these games special the way they were. Plus, on top of that, EA changed their entire mentality and culture of the reason of why they even made video games, because of the 2008 financial crisis when the recession started and all the markets in America were just crashing like crazy. So they had to take different parameters to kind of like maneuver through that effect. And then on top of that, we also got to remember how we covered in our Midway video. If you haven't watched that, watch that Midway, the king of arcade games in the early to mid 2000s, was losing multi-millions on sales so fast to the point they filed bankruptcy in 2009. So somewhere along the line, because of all of the factors that were very specific to EA's situation, but outside of EA, there was a dwindling effect of people being interested in arcade games, and it shifted and there was a major lack in interest. And Midway, which again, king of arcade games, was sinking, and EA Big found itself not immune to this decline in interest as well. So this combination essentially shaped a circumstance that made EA Big and EA's need for an arcade division obsolete, and unfortunately made EA Big lose its significance of why it should even exist, which led ultimately to EA quietly shutting down EA Sports Big in 2008. So in closing to this video and back to the question at hand, why did EA Sports Big and NFL Street fail the way it did? And it's really simple. Just like Midway, evolution of the gamer mentality and gamer interest is the reason why EA Sports Big was seen by EA as unnecessary, and they decided to close it because my generation mostly is probably the reason for that. That's because, you know, the rise of pushing realism in video games, you know, technology was getting more advanced and games were looking more realistic. People had a desire, and again, my generation had a desire to see, you know, how realistic can we make games seem, you know, in sound and feel. And arcade games is all about going against, you know, the laws of reality. So as far as making games more grounded for the sake of realism, arcade games just didn't sell like they used to. And at the end of the day, that's what matters to these companies is money, you know, because money keeps the company going. And at that point, again, a financial crisis happening in 2008, budget cuts had to be made. And unfortunately, EA Big was not making enough money, most likely, you know, to justify their existence and even, you know, spending any more investment into that kind of genre of game. And for the people like myself who were old enough to be able to experience these games, I mean, man, for as short as it was around, how impactful it was, man. You know, those games have a special place in all of our hearts. And hey, man, you know, if you're lucky enough to emulate, or if you're lucky enough to still have a PS2 that's running and functioning and you can actually go purchase these games, man, you know, what a great trip down memory lane they still are. So, But if you guys enjoyed this video, thank you for staying to the end. You are the real MVP. Hit that like button, slap that subscribe button, and feel free to watch some more of our video essays or just watch more content on the channel. I'll catch you guys on the next video. I'm out.